La Universidad Hebraica de México trae a nuestro país al Dr. Daniel Mintie, experto en trauma y manejo del síndrome de estrés postraumático. Con casi 30 años de experiencia, Daniel abre un espacio para recibir a Enlace Judío y de este modo poder conocer al internacionalmente reconocido doctor del bienestar.
Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is a way that we help people who are suffering from anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. We help them by changing the ways that they're thinking about themselves, about other people, or about the world, because these irrational thought patterns are the basis of their emotional suffering. We distinguish healthy negative emotion, which might be sadness at the loss of a loved one, from unhealthy negative emotion, which would be hopelessness or despair after such a loss. So when unhealthy negative emotion, like despair, worthlessness, hopelessness, bitterness, are creating suffering for someone, and they would like to change from those emotional states back to states of healthy negative emotion, just sadness or disappointment, and then also open the door to feeling again joy and optimism and love and closeness with others. We can help them do that by changing how they're thinking about their situation. That's the cognitive component. And what they're doing. That's the behavioral component. And both are important in creating positive and life-giving experiences of our lives and our relationships. So the technology itself is very old, actually. All of the world's wisdom traditions have noticed what we're thinking, what we're saying to ourselves, has a lot to do with how we're going to be feeling. And also what we're doing or not doing, what we're avoiding or procrastinating about, say, will have a lot to do with how we feel as well. So it's a very old technology. And at the Feeling Good Institute in Mountain View, California, we're applying cutting-edge modern tools to help our patients make these kinds of changes. You know, we've treated PTSD that is the result of a natural disaster, earthquakes, forest fires, flooding. We've also treated PTSD related to assault, physical or sexual assault. We've treated it when it comes up as a result of motor vehicle accidents or life-threatening illnesses. So the World Health Organization recently surveyed 24 countries and found that 70% of the people responding to the survey had experienced an average of 4 traumas in their lifetime. So this trauma is something that can happen to anyone, anywhere. And where we live has a lot to do with the trauma that will create PTSD. So I read recently that the state of Chihuahua now has PTSD and suicide rates approaching those in the United States. This has never happened before. And it's likely a result of the drug trade and the violence associated with that trade that is creating the PTSD for people living in that state. Here in Mexico City, I know after the earthquake last year, there was a big uptick in PTSD as a result of that event. In the state of California, this summer, these massive forest fires created PTSD in survivors of the fires who perhaps had lost their whole town, much of their family. So it tends to follow the events on the ground in a particular place, and then very common forms of PTSD that just seem to travel everywhere in the world would be related to assaults, childhood molestation, wars, and either the military PTSD associated with soldiers or civilian PTSD associated with living in a war zone. It's a wonderful question. I think the one piece of advice I would give to a colleague would be to help their patients see what we call the hidden wisdom of PTSD symptoms. If we're simply looking at a symptom like a flashback as being a form of psychopathology, we're missing an important aspect of the symptom. 100% of the time, symptoms express the core values and the code of ethics and those things that are most important to us as human beings. I work with military veterans who have flashbacks from wars that ended 40 years ago. Those flashbacks are very upsetting for them, to again and again hear the screams of their dying comrades. But when we look a little closer, we see that it's a way of expressing their love for their comrades and their commitment to them and their desire not to forget these people who perhaps have been forgotten by everyone else. So before we help someone change any symptom, be it flashbacks or negative feelings, feelings of worthlessness or shame, we want to understand the way that this expresses the true heart and soul of that human being. And when we understand that, the patient then is in a position to make a decision about changing their expression of these values in this way, or perhaps finding a new way to express their love for their family or their comrades. So this understanding what we call the hidden wisdom is, I think, an essential part of helping anyone overcome PTSD symptoms. You know, there have been so many wonderful human moments in the work that we've done. I was running a CBT group in a homeless shelter 5 years ago or so. And the women and children in this shelter had experienced multiple traumas, sometimes over their entire lives. There was a woman there who was actually born kicking black tar heroin because her mother was an addict. And as soon as she was born, she started to be treated very badly by everyone in her family, and finally ran away from home when she was about 13 and lived on the streets for about 30 years. She became an addict herself. And when she came to the program, she was as depressed and anxious and angry as any human being I'd ever met. Was also very suicidal. And she had this belief about herself that she was worthless. She'd been told this by her family, and all of the events of her life seemed to confirm this belief that other people had value, but she didn't. So it would make sense to her that she'd live on the street and be assaulted and eat out of garbage cans and shoot heroin because she didn't have human value, so she couldn't really expect anything more than that. One of our meetings, another woman was working on a very similar belief about herself. And after the meeting, I looked at the scores on her mood, because we measure that before and after each group. And all of her negative emotion had gone to 0. And I thought, well, she must have made a mistake. She put the number on the wrong side. But when she came back the next week, she looked completely different. Her hair had been nicely done, she had new clothes, she was smiling, she looked relaxed. And I asked her about her scores from the last group. And I said, did you make a mistake here? And she said, no, I didn't make a mistake. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, when that other woman was working, and she realized she had this belief, but that was just something people had been saying to her. That wasn't real. I realized, oh, that's true for me too. I've been thinking I was worthless, but I realized that's just a thought. I don't have to think that anymore. So I went and I signed up for a housing place to live, and I got my hair done, and I have these new clothes. Do you like my hair? And I started to weep as I said to her, your hair is just so beautiful. Thank you. I so appreciate our chance to chat.